Hi everyone, this is Chris Grosso with the Healing Journey web series presented by Toivo by Advocacy Unlimited. I am so excited about my guest today. It is the lovely Tara Brach, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tara before we get into the interview. She is a leading Western teacher of Buddhist meditation, emotional healing, and spiritual awakening. She has practiced and taught meditation for over 35 years with an emphasis on vipassana, mindfulness or insight meditation. Tara is the senior teacher and founder of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington. A clinical psychologist, Tara is the author of Radical Acceptance and True Refuge. And for anyone who's read my books, they know how important Tara is to me and how wonderful her books are. So please visit her at tarabrach.com, which will be linked in the comments section. And Tara, thank you so much for being with me today.
Total delight, Chris. Yeah.
So I know that a lot of listeners that tune in are newer on their path. I have some established practitioners as well, but I feel very passionate working with those that are a bit newer. So I thought, even though I know you've written about it, and I'm sure you've talked about it time and again, would you mind sharing a little bit about your own introduction to the spiritual path, how you came to it, and along with that, any insights or wisdom you might want to share for those who are new to their own paths?
I'd be glad to. And I love talking about it actually because it still feels very fresh, what really brings us and deepens us on the path. And, for me, it was partly when I was in high school and college, feeling the sense of that yearning for what I intuited was here, like loving more fully and really discovering truth and, like living fully. And there was the suffering, just feeling that deep down sense of being separate, not okay. And so kind of just scanning around what's really going to help. And so that's kind of it. And, I had different experiences that felt like, oh, so this is part of the path. And nature was a big one, and loving other people was a big one. And I had spurs like psychedelics and yoga and meditation actually started being the thing. So the common denominator, I guess, for me and so many is that the suffering was this story that something's wrong with me, that I'm not okay. And in spiritual practice, and I joined an ashram, and so I was practicing in a spiritual community with a lot of other people, which makes it easier. I had repeated glimpses or introductions to a who I was that was in no way bound by that story. I just started getting those tastes of, oh, so there's a really sincere awakening heart here. There's awareness here. And I started more and more trusting this is it. And I'd say that if there's one theme over the years, it's been a sense of shifting from believing the old story about myself to trusting something essentially good in myself and others.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Something that we all share. And as you're saying that, I completely relate because I look back before I guess you could say officially stepped onto a spiritual path, but I recognize times earlier in my life. And I'm talking about like times when I was skateboarding, or I'm a musician, so playing music where I was completely connected to this place, but I had no spiritual context to wrap around it. So, I would just think, oh, that's a neat experience, whatever. But yes, as I started practicing and learning and reading and visiting sanghas and so forth, and started to put some language to the experience, it was pretty incredible, actually. So thank you for sharing that.
And you're right. That is the hub of it. It's like we already are on a path.
Right.
You already were waking up, but a practice gives it enough of a regularity and some context. I know for myself, when I went into college, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was on a track to be a lawyer. And when I graduated, I moved into an ashram. So something happened in there, and it happened in nature, and it happened with friends, and it happened in yoga. But it woke me up.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually 2 credits away myself from finishing a degree in substance abuse counseling. In the middle of this internship, I had a few months left, and I just felt pulled to stop and leave, which
Mm.
seemed, completely counterintuitive to what I had known up to that point because, you got to go to school, do this, do that. And it just, I knew in such a deep way it wasn't what I was meant to be doing. And I didn't know what I was meant to be doing, but I just honored that calling. And it's odd, life is strange. But here I am today by tuning in and bringing practices such as meditation and learning from the great wisdom traditions and the teachers such as yourself and many others who've come before you. And so I kind of share that to say, again, going back to, so anyone else who's listening, who's just kind of on their way, very, very new to the path. I appreciate the beginner's mind approach, even for those of us who've been on it a little while. But is there any particular insights or, just wisdom that you would offer them as they're kind of feeling their way around?
Well, I was just taking in what you were saying, Chris,
Mm.
about how there you were almost graduated and something in you had this yearning and intuition that pulled you, that let you go in a different direction, let you
Yeah.
follow your heart. And I'm remembering, there's a woman who's a palliative caregiver who has accompanied thousands and thousands of people as they're dying.
Mm.
And she said that the greatest regret of the dying is I didn't live true to myself,
Mm.
that I lived according to the expectations of others or the society's expectations or my internal shoulds. And I feel like your example and mine some is that we had it was grace, it was a blessing that we actually listened deeper than to the expectations. So that would be one encouragement for those that are new, is to give yourself permission to step out of the box of some idea of how your life should be
Mm.
and really listen. Listen to what sometimes described as your deepest aspiration. What is it that really brings you alive, that you really love? And it takes courage to listen. And then the second thing to mention is that it does take a practice, some regular systematic way of training yourself to pay attention, because we are so conditioned to have our minds not only distracted, but a negativity bias that keeps us actually going towards things that keep us small and keep us feeling that we're defective in some way, or that keep us judging others. So a practice, and when I say a practice, and I know you are the same, Chris, some way of coming into presence, some
Yes.
way of really coming back into our bodies and our hearts so we know we're here.
Mm.
And one teacher said that the hub of the spiritual life is intention, knowing what matters, and attention, learning to train ourselves to be right here.
Absolutely. There's something I plan on talking to you about later, and we will come back to this, but it's coming to mind right now. Because I'm actually taking this wonderful offering that you and Jack Cornfield, another incredible teacher, have put together with Sounds True. And you talk during that about being at home wherever we find ourselves. So I'm jumping a little ahead, but as you're sharing that, it makes me think a very simple practice that I absolutely love from Thich Nhat Hanh, the wonderful Vietnamese Zen monk, is so simple, of just breathing in, mentally noting to yourself that I've arrived. And as you breathe out, mentally noting, I am home. I've arrived. I am home. And that kind of makes me think of, at home wherever we find ourselves. So anyway, that just came to mind from you sharing that. I'm jumping a little ahead, but thank you.
I love it. I love it. And it's kind of wonderful to bring that in right at the beginning of us
Yeah.
talking, because in a way, if each of us paused for a moment and said, what will let me feel at home in this moment?
Mm. Yeah.
And what we find out is that our thought, if we're thinking, we're separated. The thoughts create the abyss. The thoughts separate us. And if we come back into our senses, like if you just pause, if you're listening right now, and say, okay, let me just feel the body. Let me feel this breath. Let me listen to these sounds. Immediately there's an intimacy. We know we're more here.
Mm. I love that. And you actually shared during that section. Since we're on it, we might as well chat a little about it.
Yeah.
But you'd shared a really powerful quote from Maya Angelou, and she had said, "I long, as does every other human, to be at home wherever I find myself," and and I love that. And then you went on to really elaborate on that, and it was really a profound teaching. I know the course is well underway now, but I believe for anyone listening, if they're interested, I think you can still go to Sounds True and sign up. I highly recommend checking it out. I think I have just 2 sessions left myself. It's been wonderful. Um,
There's going to be another round actually offered in a couple of months, and if you get
uh,
on my email list, I can, whoever's listening, I can let you know when it's available. But I wanted
awesome.
to also share, because what you brought to mind is that one of the deepest understandings that's helped me is the sense that our real sickness is homesickness.
Mm,
Is that one, in some way, when we are at war with ourselves, when we're judging others, it's really the pain of it is we're homesick. We've left home. So just that practice of being at home wherever we are, what freedom, you know?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so important, and that's it. That sense of separation. I write very candidly about my own pain and struggle in my life and battles with addiction, and the overwhelming sense of aloneness and suffering that I experienced. I'll even go back. I've kept a number of journals that I would write in throughout the years, usually when I was actively under the influence, and it was so angry, and it was so alone, and often very angry towards God, though I had no idea of what God was. And I know that's a very loaded word for some people, but just sharing my experience. And it was to the point where I would often isolate during these times, and I would live in my own apartment. And just so I didn't feel so alone, I would walk out, and it wasn't a city, it was a little town called Middletown, Connecticut. And there's a main street there where there's always people walking. And I would just go for, even if it was a 10-minute walk, a loop around this main street, just to pass by a person, not to talk to them, but so I didn't feel so alone. It was like I could breathe while I was out there, but inevitably to return back to the apartment in just this overwhelming sense of separation. And that's where I found, not only from the Buddhist tradition, because I think there's wonderful teachings from all of the great wisdom traditions that help us reconnect and begin to dissolve that sense of separation. But Buddhist speaking, let's talk about being a lamp unto yourself. I think that fits in pretty nicely here. And if you don't mind, to preface that, I want to share an excerpt from your book, True Refuge, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Cool. So you write in that when the Buddha was dying, he gave a final message to his beloved attendant Ananda and to generations to come. Be a lamp unto yourself. Be refuge to yourself. Take yourself to no external refuge. What did he mean? Our ultimate refuge is none other than our own being. There is a light of awareness that shines through each of us and guides us home. We are never separated from this luminous awareness, any more than waves are separated from the ocean. Even when we feel most ashamed or lonely, reactive or confused, we are never actually apart from the awakened state of our heart-mind. Oh, that's so beautiful and so true. Like I said, I felt that disconnect, yet a part of me also knew there was something more. So please, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that, I think that's so important.
You know, I often use the word trance,
Mm.
Chris, as you probably know, that we spend most of our time, if we're not really paying attention in the moment, in a kind of virtual reality, in a trance. And the self is in here and the world's out there. And there's generally a story about what we need to do to be okay and what around the corner is threatening and so on. We also have a trance about spiritual awakening, which says that it's down the road, that it probably can't happen to us, that it mostly happens to people that have done, 3-year retreats or the Buddha back 2,500 years ago. And the most liberating perspective that you can have, and you can choose this, is to begin to sense, oh, that awakened state is intrinsic to what I am. And it's just a matter of relaxing back. It's a matter of, instead of pedaling on the bicycle forward and racing from the moment, stop pedaling. Just relax back. So the big delusion in trance is that we're on our way somewhere else. And the freedom of these teachings, be a lamp unto yourself, is to get that the light we're seeking and the love we're seeking and the truth we're seeking, it's right here. It's right here. Now, I want to add one comment to that, which is there's a way that spiritual ego can actually misunderstand this and say, I am a lamp unto myself, that the self is the one that owns the spirituality and knows, and that we can't look towards and find in our engagement with others the truth. And in fact, as much as we're a lamp unto ourselves, we're a lamp unto each other. So part of me waking up is feeling the way that spirit and creativity shines through you right now. I mean, that's part of my path. Yeah. And I'm not just being flattering. It's like that is as much the way the lamp shines through as through this body mind. So it can be misunderstood in an egoic way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important caveat to that. So thank you for sharing that. And I, again, noting that a lot of listeners are newer to the path, it can seem so overwhelming at times. I know when I first stepped on, like, there's so many different teachings and offerings, and one tradition says this where another seems to contradict it, yet they kind of sound almost similar in a way. And but letting be is a phrase I've heard, and I like that, just letting be, relaxing. So part of me then, I hear that, and I think to some of the times where, speaking for myself, when I was caught in active addiction, I was in horrible, just mentally, emotionally, it was terrible. So to let be in a moment like that where you are really caught in these reins is, I'm not going to say impossible, because nothing's impossible, but it's pretty close. It's very difficult. So that's something I wanted to talk to you about as well. Particularly if we're going to speak in a Buddhist text, in Buddhist cosmology, there's what's called the realm of hungry ghosts. And it talks about the torment of intense desire that can never really be satisfied. And that's, something that speaks very, very clearly to me, thinking back to those times, because it was this desire that it never could be satisfied. In the 12-step fellowships, they have a saying, 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And boy, there is such truth to that. So if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about that. Learning, well, first of all, let's just talk about the dissatisfaction, the unsatisfactoriness when we're in those places, and how can we learn to find a way to come out of them, to let be, to accept it.
Yeah. So first I want to honor what you're saying about letting be, that in a way the most profound meditation is just letting everything be just as it is. Right. Really just allowing this life to unfold. And because we're so caught in grasping and resisting and struggling and controlling, there are some ways of training our heart and mind that actually create the atmosphere that allows for letting be. So it really makes sense that you can't just be caught in an addiction and all that excruciating suffering and say, okay, I'm just going to let be. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So given that, there's different ways of understanding the suffering of desire, and desire itself is not only normal, natural, etc. It's a necessary, essential part of existence. I mean, we wouldn't be here were it not for desire.
Right.
Universes get created because in some way something in awareness wants to take form,
Yes.
So desire is not the problem. The problem is that the sense of self gets organized around wanting and having to have in a way that makes it so that how it is right now is not okay. There's not a capacity to be okay with the moment. We have to be okay. And it gets created when our basic needs aren't met. And so we go about trying to fill the hole of the basic needs with substitutes, and the substitutes can't satisfy. They satisfy enough. Let's say the substitute is, let's get approval because we don't feel loved. Getting approval is a temporary fix. We feel good for, 10 minutes until we need to go and get our next fix of approval. And similarly, if it's a drink or if it's binging on food or whatever, there's a temporary sense of self-soothing. But the suffering is that we have to have it again. And not only that, we end up feeling shame about the fact that we're hooked. So that's the Buddha described that as the second arrow. The first arrow is this unquenchable thirst, and the second arrow is the shame about it. And we bring the second arrow to ourselves when we feel needy or out of control. And so part of the shame, the pain of strong desire and grasping and addiction is the sense of being a bad person. And so one thing I'll say is that it's not until we begin to let go of the second arrow, it's not until we begin to forgive that addictiveness is there, that we can begin to heal the actual wound that's underneath it. The first step is to let go of the shame. And that's where it helps to be with other people. Because when I can tell you, I spent a bunch of years addicted to food in a way that I felt out of control and I was ashamed of myself. And you can tell me about the excruciation of being completely compelled towards substance. We get that it's not my addiction, it's just the addiction, the conditioning. And our hearts can hold it in a way that loosens up the grip of the blame, so we can begin to say, well, underneath that addiction, underneath I have to have those drugs or that alcohol or that food or whatever it is, what's the real yearning? And Chris, I've come to call this a kind of U-turn, where we make a U-turn, that wherever we're fixated, and every one of us, unless we're free, has some sense of what we call if-only mind. And if-only mind says, if only I could get that job, or if only I could get the right partner, if only I could lose the 10 pounds, or if only I could whatever, then I'd be okay. That we've hitched our well-being to something. And the U-turn, and this is the basic way that I find is powerful in working with the hook of desire, is to get, I'm hitched to something out there, some external in order to be okay. And then make a U-turn and bring the attention back to the place of wanting itself. And this is where so for instance, with one man who came to a retreat and his girlfriend had broken up with him, and in his mind, she was the one, and he really was devastated. He was never going to find love in his life. And he just kept fantasizing and obsessing and so on. And we did the U-turn. And I said, just feel the longing. What is it you're really wanting? And he, instead of saying, I want her, what is the experience you're wanting? And the experience he wanted was that sense of connection, of feeling a sense of belonging to something, of that warmth, of that kind of let go of the boundary and just spread out and be of kind of oneness. And the more I invited him to experience and say what he was wanting, the more he actually was touching into the fruit of the longing, what he really was longing for. So he was tracing back the desire to its source. And what he came out of it saying, and he had to practice this a lot, was, if he could every time do that U-turn and find that source, he said, I feel like the loving I'm yearning for is inside me. And I would like a partner, and feeling that with someone else. But he wasn't grasping. So he was much more available in his next relationship to have that relational dance, but know that the loving was always and already here. So that's just an example of working with desire that's so powerful. Now, I will say one other piece, and that is when it's addictive craving, there's always a fear in there. There's a fear that I can't handle this, and if I don't get what I want, I'll be tormented. So, in addition to tracing back the desire, sometimes we have to really offer inwardly a real sense of kindness and compassion in order to be soft and open enough to be able to relax into the moment.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that practice. Wow, it's beautiful. And I wish, as you're sharing it, I'm thinking back to so many times where that would have come in really handy for me. But better late than never, right? I'm still here, which in and of itself is wonderful, and as are the people that are listening and watching. So thank you for sharing that. And I feel like you've already talked a bit about this, but I don't know that there can be enough conversation around it, especially with the people that I tend to work with, which is finding that we're at war with ourselves, which is a big one. For many of us, we experience this constant battle in life. It's internal, and we're plagued with thoughts of unworthiness and dissatisfaction. Sometimes they're very loud, sometimes they're subtle. It might just be an underlying sense of disease, but they're still there. Let's talk a little bit about that. I think we've already kind of talked in this ballpark, but even to this day, it's interesting, 10, 12 years down the path of meditation, I still have these thoughts that come up, self-judging and self-incriminating. It still happens. Not every day anymore. It's way better than it used to be, but it still happens. I'm grateful today that I can recognize them as thoughts and not, attach and identify with them more times than not. Sometimes I still lose myself in them, but it's way less than it used to be. So maybe we can talk about this. Why are we at war with ourselves? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, I'm with you, by the way, because when I wrote Radical Acceptance, it came right out of my own
Yeah,
experiences of realizing, I was so far from being my own best friend, as one
sure.
person put it, that I was so harsh with myself. And that then after years of working with clients and students, I came to sense this is the most pervasive suffering in the culture. It's what I call the trance of unworthiness.
Yeah.
And we might know we judge ourselves, but we don't often get how much that squeeze of something's wrong with me is part of everything. So that any interaction on some level, we're not free to be as spontaneous or playful or alive
Yes.
because we're afraid we're not going to be the person that will be accepted by another. And even when it's not like the deep, I'm damaged goods, there's still a sense of not enough. And
Yes.
one of my favorite cartoons just has this dog talking to a psychiatrist saying, it's always good dog this and good dog that, but is it ever great dog? You know? And it kind of sums it up for me
Yeah.
that we so often have underneath what's going on a sinking feeling of not meeting our own standards. And, when you say, well, how come? It definitely mirrors our society that we're so competitive. And when there's all these standards to meet, it's like you can't just assume to be acceptable and lovable. You have to look a certain way and achieve a certain way. And if you're not in the dominant culture, I think of what it's like if you're a person of color, if you're not of a higher class. There
Sure.
are so many messages in our society that say that you're less than, that it's easy to internalize them. So many of us, whether it's because of what the dominant culture says or our parents in some way giving us the message of if you want to be loved, if you want to be accepted, be less needy or be more fun to be around or lose weight or be whatever. So we internalize that, and often, it's very easy I feel like the deepest truths are the ones we forget, which is if we aren't kind towards ourselves, if we don't feel love towards the life that's here, we can't really embrace others fully. We're
So
always going to be guarded. I have one man who's a friend, African American, who's an attorney now. He's a judge and highly accomplished, lovely person on all levels. And he has imposter syndrome. Like deep down, he keeps having what you described, that kind of that self-doubt thing that comes up. But for him, he grew up in a kind of a ghetto, a really very, very deep poverty and a lot of violence. And now research shows that if you grow up in poverty and a lot of violence, it affects your whole nervous system and in a way that the trauma's locked in. So he has a kind of compartmentalized vulnerability in there that makes him feel like something's wrong with him. And it makes him feel like an imposter. And we all have some of that. Yeah. I mean, we all have kind of parts of our being where we feel really vulnerable, where we don't trust if others really knew us, that they'd respect us anymore. And it takes a lot. It takes a really big commitment to love ourselves back into wholeness. It's like, to me, that's, if there's any one commitment right at the front, the center of the spiritual path, it's that commitment to embrace the parts of ourselves we've pushed away.
Absolutely. And so I want to actually talk to you about loving ourselves into wholeness. Before I do though, it just made me think of something where I realized about 10 years ago, I'm very heavily tattooed, covered, and have been getting tattoos since literally my birthday when I turned 18 and legally could. I had been getting pierced before that. But what I realized, so this was several years into getting tattooed, and this goes back about 10 years now. I realized that I was getting them because it was a very unworthiness thing for me. I wanted people to look at my tattoos instead of look at me. I didn't want people to see me. And to such an extent that, I mean, I grew up in the punk rock and hardcore music scene and culture, so that's part of it. But the bigger thing for me was it took the attention off of me and the focus off of me. And I had this realization, and it was very big for me. It was a very healing thing in a way, and I still get tattooed to this day, but I do so much more now out of my appreciation for the art. It's kind of too late to go back anyways at this point, but I don't get them anymore to take attention away. And often, like, I'll get them in places where people can't see them just because they're meaningful to me. But anyways, so it runs very deeply, and so even not that you need to act out and get tattoos, but I mean, people with plastic surgery or, any number of things, buying very expensive clothes, whatever the case may be. It was very interesting for me to see how it played out in my own life and to see how it does for others. And so anyways.
I love your example because I call them false refuges. When we
Yes.
feeling bad about ourselves, we all have a set of strategies on how to feel better, how to either impress people or impress ourselves or do more or avoid attention.
Yeah.
And what happens is the false refuge actually locks us into a smaller identity. We still feel like a small deficient person and we're just more defended and so on.
Yeah.
So one of the, to me, the hard part is that we generally fixate our attention on where we think we're doing things wrong. We're always monitoring and noticing where we're falling short. And so for any of us that have hurt other people or find that we're caught in habits that are hurting ourselves or whatever, it's very hard to forgive ourselves. It's very hard to just come down to our good intentions. Like now you're much more creative with the tattooing.
Right.
It's very hard to forgive ourselves. It's very hard to embrace ourselves. So it takes a real training to do that. And I thought maybe one of the guided meditations, if you were up for it, is we could just do a guided meditation on self-compassion.
Please, I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're listening right now or watching and you have something you're aware of that it's hard to accept yourself for, or forgive yourself for, or be kind to yourself for. If you've got something like that in your mind, we'll do a practice that I call the rain of self-compassion. And it's based, some of you might have heard of the acronym RAIN. It's a slightly different version of the acronym RAIN. So you might close your eyes and make sure you're in a comfortable position, and take some moments to feel your breath. And I invite you to take a few long, deep breaths so that you inhale and extend the length of the in-breath. And then with the out-breath, feel the sensations of releasing the breath, of letting go. Breathing in deeply. And slow out breath, relaxing outward, letting go. And then just let the breath resume in its natural rhythm. And feel your breathing body. And bring to mind a situation that in some way illustrates when you feel stuck, when you feel like you're turning on yourself, you're at war with yourself, you're caught in feeling bad for something you've said or done. Might be with another person where you feel like you've in some way lost your temper or been hurtful. It might be a way that you treat yourself. The RAIN of self-compassion, the acronym RAIN, starts with R, which is to simply recognize, okay, I'm stuck. I'm in that at war with myself moment. I'm judging myself. I'm turned on myself. And just recognizing it. This is the first step of mindfulness, is to notice what's happening. And the A of RAIN is just to allow it all to be there right now. So you might sense the situation that's bringing it up, and sense the feelings that are coming up and the thoughts that make up that feeling of down on yourself. And the A is just let it all be there, allow it. If we don't pause and allow what's going on, we can't begin to deepen our attention and really bring some healing. So the recognizing and allowing sets the stage to do some healing. Now the I of RAIN means investigate. And we investigate with a very curious and gentle attention. And you might investigate by sensing, well, what are you believing about yourself? Are you believing that you're a failure? That you're unlovable? Are you believing that in some way you will never get it right? What are you believing? Are you believing that you'll always be rejected? We investigate, and mostly the investigation's in the body. How does it feel when you're turned on yourself, when you're down on yourself? Where do you feel it in your body? So investigate and feel into your throat, your chest, your belly. So you can notice, okay, so this is when I'm in the trance of unworthiness. This is how it feels. This is what it's like to be down on myself. So you've recognized, you've allowed, you're investigating. Now the N of RAIN is to nourish with self-compassion. And I'd invite you to put your hand on your heart at this point. If you've never done this before, it's very interesting exploration. Just a gentle touch, and feel, and you might vary the touch till it feels gentle, so that your intention is to bring kindness to the part of you that's disturbed or distressed or upset in some way. And one way of bringing kindness is just to feel that touch and send a message to yourself that you feel would be healing. You might sense what this part most needs right now. the part of you that's upset, the part of you that's suffering. What does it most need to be reminded of? What does it most need to remember, to trust? Sometimes when I'm sending a message to myself, I'll simply say, "It's okay, sweetheart." Or Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen master, says a message is, "Darling, I care about this suffering." A Hawaiian healer uses the message, "I'm sorry and I love you." What words might convey care that you can send to your own heart? If it's difficult sending kindness to yourself, you might imagine and bring to mind someone who's an expression of compassion and wisdom to you. It could be a spiritual figure or a grandparent, a child, a dog. Just imagine that being's love and energy running through your hands and pouring into your heart. Nourishing your own being with love. After we do the steps of rain, recognizing, allowing, investigating, and nourishing, the key moment is to notice what happens after rain. Just like after a gentle rainfall, the flowers can bloom. Just sense who you are when you're no longer living inside the thoughts and the beliefs and feelings of a bad self. If you don't believe anything's wrong with you, who are you? If you're no longer believing that anything's wrong with you, who are you? And just rest in that. Rest in that spacious, tender awareness that's right here. And as you're ready, take a few more full breaths and open your eyes. And here we are again.
I love that practice. You shared that as well at length in this program you're doing with Jack. And for some reason, I don't know how, but I had never heard of it before. And I know it's attributed to another woman. I forgot her name.
Michelle McDonald. The history of rain is about 20 years ago. Michelle McDonald coined the acronym, and then it's gone through some changes.
Sure.
I added in the heart piece, which feels real important to it. But what we just did now, Chris, is actually even a little different than what I taught in The Power of Awareness.
Okay, I thought...
Yeah, the N in this one is nourish yourself with self-compassion. And then the non-identification is what comes after you've done that. And then you just rest in that larger sense of being.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about the larger sense of being, if we could, for a moment, because
I just want to, before I forget, say that if anybody's listening and you like that meditation, on tarabrach.com, my website, /self-compassion, no hyphen, no space, you'll find the meditation and a whole document on it.
Yeah, and beyond just that, Tara has an incredible library of meditations as well. So allow me, please, to plug that for you, because like I told you before we started, I even in my last book, I include a link to your webpage because it's just so wonderful that those are there for people. So, but yeah, so resting into this natural awareness, I know it's something we didn't plan on talking about, but I think it's something that is important for people to know, because we're talking about the early stages of the path and going within and healing and learning to love ourselves. But what are we moving towards? What is this natural awareness? I know it goes by many different names from the traditions, but in your experience, natural awareness?
Yeah. So we're going towards reality, which is what we really are. And when we step out of thoughts, step out of all the stories and just sense, well, what's right here? If we just get that clean and clear, what we discover is quite simple and pure. There's an innate wakefulness right here, just a wakeful awareness. There's a quality of openness. There's no center or nothing that's solid. And there's a tenderness, or you might say a warmth, which is a very intrinsic loving or caring about whatever we encounter. So in a way, what we're going towards is really the essence of what we are. It's realizing that essence, that goodness, and then being able to live from it. And I think that the path is really including both, that we can get many glimpses. Probably each of you listening have had glimpses, whether it's in nature, feeling that wonder when you're looking at the night sky, or looking at the gleam in a child's eye, or lovemaking, or music. You get these glimpses of that sense of aliveness and awareness and presence. But what brings the spiritual path alive is when we're actually in our day-to-day life really living from that openness and care. So that it's a sense of, rather than a self-centeredness, it's a sense of of belonging to a larger world and serving and savoring that whole larger world.
Going back to, yes, the that sense of separation, dissolving that. And yeah, there it is right there.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And I know that's kind of a tricky question to ask, because I know once we start putting these definitions and ideas around it, it kind of takes us away from it a bit. But it's still very helpful, I've found, to have, some kind of idea of what it is or what others' experience of it has been. But it's like the old saying, I can tell you what a peach tastes like, but if you really want to know, you need to bite into it yourself. So
that's exactly. And one of the big illusions is that we're trying to get somewhere.
Right.
We begin to taste and experience that essence really when we relax back.
Yeah.
And we come out of thoughts and relax back and just notice right here, this moment. It shines through.
It does. Beautiful. So I know we've got about 10, 12 minutes left. I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you choose which topic we're going to close on. There was the topic of forgiveness, which I know we've kind of talked already a bit about that area of things, but there's never enough talk, I think, about healing and forgiveness. We could talk about that, or we could also talk about this next generation of truth seekers, because there is, in a way, a bit of a passing of the torch. And I find myself in an interesting position where many people like myself want to make sure that these great wisdom teachings are carried down, and that they're offered and honored in a way that's pure to them. So what do you feel like talking about? You want to talk about forgiveness, or you want to talk about next generation? I'm good either way.
I can see a way that they go one into the other.
Let's do it. All right.
I'm ever ambitious.
I like your style.
But just to say, with forgiveness, it feels to me like if we look at the evolution of consciousness, we're moving from that kind of separate egoic state where we quickly go into judgment of ourselves and others.
Yes.
Into that place of sensing we-ness, that sense of belonging and connection. And cultivating a forgiving heart is part of the pathway into that. And it's really this next generation of spiritualists that is going to be moving forward on that. And I often use the phrase unreal other, that when we're in a egoic state, you and I would be perceiving each other as the other out there, kind of two-dimensional being that we hope approves of us or likes us, versus sensing the light and awareness that's looking through both of our eyes is really the same, and that which is listening is really the same. And interestingly, in the whole evolution of the brain, we are developing more and more capacity to see past the mask and sense our togetherness. And that is what the prefrontal cortex can do. And so I really look at it as this next generation is going to go much, much farther in those widening circles of belonging, where rather than the racism and violence of racism and the violence of sexism and the violence of classism, we'll be able to look at each other and see, and a true namaste, where
Yeah.
we see the light of awareness shining through.
Yeah.
So where the work is where that's not happening. Where each one of us in our own lives, and we all have it, have somebody or some groups of people that we have created into other that is in some way bad or wrong. That person should be different. And that's the place where the work is. It's like most people have this idea that forgiving is a good idea until they really have to forgive something. And then then it gets hairy. And so one of the metaphors, Chris, that has most been helpful to me when we're caught in an unreal other that's bad, this person should be different, this is to imagine you're walking in the woods and you see a little dog by a tree, and the dog, and you bend over to pet it, and then it lurches at you and its fangs are bared and it's aggressive. And you go from being friendly to being really angry at it, but then you see that it's one of its legs is in a trap. And then you shift again to feeling a sense of, oh, you poor thing. Well, so it is when it comes to somebody that we're blaming. If we can begin to sense how that person's got their leg in a trap, how in some way there's unmet needs, sorrow, fear, insecurity that's causing that behavior. So when I work with forgiveness with people, there's a few steps, but the first step when we've been injured by someone is not to try to forgive them. The first step is to bring first self-compassion to the place that feels hurt. And if we bypass that, it's going to be a kind of premature forgiveness that's not substantial.
Right.
But if the first step is to say, okay, this is hurt, this is hurting, and bring kindness towards ourselves, then something softens and opens and we can begin to look and see past the trance of unreal other and be able to get, oh, that person has their leg in a trap.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that vengeance is a lazy form of grief.
I love that.
Yeah, when we're flashing out, it's a lazy way of trying to cover the wounded place.
Right.
So where this fits into the next generation is that it's really up to all of us, but I'm saying you in the sense that the spirit of past generations has been to move more and more out of that egoic story and more into the living from the truth of who we are. And to me, the main domains that needs to play out is really in our society, that we don't make earth an unreal other, that the earth is our living body, and we sense our compassion to the earth. That's carrying forward the teachings. That we see that we have implicit racism, but we're willing to face that and learn about it and wake up from it, because we can't be whole on this planet if we have one whole domain of people that aren't considered part of our being, So those are the places that I actually think we purify the teachings by living them, because each generation needs to bring the teachings alive in a way that's most relevant to the planet in that time.
Right. Absolutely. So let me ask you this one final thing in relation to that, because it is very inspiring for me to see these younger people, many of them really stepping up. And even if it's not in a spiritual context, they're just, they're really showing up and being of service and learning, to be more loving in the world. But I do speak with a lot of younger people that feel very jaded and are very cynical and skeptic to the whole even notion of spirituality, something that personally I experienced when I was younger. And I think to a certain degree there is something healthy, to have some skepticism, some discernment, but it can also go, I think, a little overboard. And so on the one hand, we do have this wonderful, just greater tolerance blossoming in our youth, and we mentioned racism and sexism, homophobia. These things are starting to fall by the wayside, though of course it's still there, but it's decreasing. So for those that are still though jaded, going back to the spirituality aspect, when they hear, someone say like it's all one, a true namaste, what would you say to that when they someone that takes issue, like, yeah, right, like it sounds nice, but it's just nice talk, nice ideas. What would you say to something like that? To the
More,
skeptic.
more what I would do is
Sure.
ask. And the question I would say is, when is it that you feel most fulfilled or gratified, or what is it that you most enjoy or take pleasure in? What do you want?
Mm,
And I think that inside the jadedness there's an intelligence, just like you do,
sure.
which is not wanting to get kind of carried on some current of delusion. And I think it's that kind of truth seeking in a person. So I really honor that.
Mm,
I honor the jadedness, but I think it's also important to ask, where do you feel most sincere? Where do you feel that that you want to unfold the best of yourself? What is most important to you? And start with that, because I don't feel like spirituality is something out there.
right.
Just every one of us has our own version of unfolding into the best that we can be, and it always, on some level, has to do with a deeper capacity to care, to speak truth, to hear truth, to see truth, to live from wholeness.
Oh, beautiful. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap this up. And I couldn't agree more. I will often tell people, maybe you feel compelled once you step on the path to go to the Himalayas and leave everything, move to an ashram. Great. Maybe you'll be living in a loft in New York City, staying up till 3 as an artist, taking little breaks to mindfully breathe, and that's your path. But
Exactly.
that's it, finding it, what your passion is. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your time. Once again, for viewers, listeners, please visit Tara at her website, tarabrach.com. There is so many incredible resources there. And Tara, you also host a podcast with the MindPod Network. And I will include a link to that as well. I don't know the link off the top of my head, but we'll make sure, so anyone watching or listening to this, the link will be in the description box so you can check out her podcast. There are lots of great teachings. And was there anything, Tara, that I didn't cover that you would like to share? Or do you feel like we got everything out that needed to get
We
out?
touched a lot, Chris, and I really love the spirit of what you're doing, because I feel like it's really having us all face towards what is it that we can really trust in ourselves and each other, and really nourishing it. And beautiful, beautiful work.
Thank you. Thank you. And well, obviously I deeply honor yours too. So thank you. And thank you for your time so much.
Blessings. Thank you.